Made to be Romanced. I'm Tori.
And I'm Skye.
And today we're discussing
Need
Need
Me.
Me. No, I feel like we nailed that.
We nailed it. Could not have been more perfect, frankly.
Skye, thanks so much for joining me on the podcast. It's so nice to meet you virtually.
Yes, it's so nice to meet you. I've been listening to your podcast, the other, and so I was very excited to hear when there was a book podcast.
Yeah, this is so funny because we met through mutuals.
Yes.
Maddie Mitchell, who I collab with quite a bit, and you listen to her podcast.
You know what's funny? Like her last episode, I was just listening to it, and it was student scandals. And guess what? A lot of the scandals were. Guess what's like not as hot? I know. Guess what's not as hot when it's real? Anyway.
No, literally. But that's the beauty about like a taboo romance
completely.
novel is you get to live out a fantasy that's you're not really living it.
Exactly. I love that so much. And I read and write like a lot of I guess like subversive fiction, forbidden fiction, and I love exploring those things.
Yeah, can you tell me a little bit about how you got into like reading the romance genre and then writing?
Yeah, so one of the things I really love about the romance genre, now that I'm in it and know about it, is that it's often passed down from like mothers to daughters or grandmothers to granddaughters, things like that, a little bit like furtively, secretly. And one of the reasons that it has to have been passed that way is because basically, even though it has been the largest selling genre for decades, it was often either not shelved in bookstores or hidden in the back, things like that. And so because of that, I did not know about it at all. And so I would just go to Barnes and Noble and I would go to like the literature and fiction section. And this was like well before Book Talk. So they did not have the pretty, yeah.
The spicy, like.
They didn't have any of that,
yeah.
no. And so I would literally just go to like the literature and fiction section and I would pick up a book. And I remember I would just like, I would be like, oh, this looks interesting. And then I would like flip to the back and I would just look. I wasn't looking for how it actually ended, but I'm like, are people crying? Are they like despairing? Are they happy? You know, because like I can go to really dark places with fiction and I enjoy that, but like you've got to take me home in the end or I will just be devastated forever. So I would do that and I had no idea. Had no idea there was an entire genre for me. And so it was only when I had my son, I'm sitting there nursing. And so there's a lot of sitting. And my husband got me my first iPhone. And I discovered, you know, one of the interesting things about e-reading is that it has sort of democratized and made it more discoverable. So I discovered romance and then dove right in. I actually discovered it via historicals.
I feel like that's a lot of entry point just because it's such a huge point of romance novels. But it's so funny because I feel like that's why I avoided the romance genre, because I was like, I'm not super into the historical or like Regency. Like I can get down with like a Bridgerton book or like whatever, but like that didn't draw me in. It was actually a podcast that like forced me to read a book. Like she just asked me to come on and read a book, and I was like, oh my God, I love this, because I was a big reader growing up.
Yeah.
But then when I went to university, I stopped reading for pleasure because I was having to read articles and textbooks. And then when I retried to get into reading, I was like, okay, this young adult genre isn't fitting like what I'm looking for. And then I was lucky to find romance. But yeah, I like that you said about how it gets passed down from like a mother or a grandmother. And I think that's so true. And it is forbidden because you said e-readers has democratized it in a way that I feel like also you can read romance and no one knows it's romance on the bus or whatever. Like in so many ways, it has democratized the romance genre.
Exactly. It's hard. I mean, there is a lot of shame at first because people are, you know, there's just so much, you know, it feels like the people who want to say the most, like, have never read a romance novel. And so, but the thing is, even when you're more comfortable with it, I'm also like a really private person. I do not have any bumper stickers on my car. I don't even have a tattoo because I'm like, y'all don't need to know what I'm thinking, you know? Like,
I love that so much. And honestly, for a person with a podcast, I also think I'm very private and keep a lot of things close to the chest.
Right. Well, and like my books are private, like what I
Yeah.
write, but it's like in designated times and spaces, right? Not like just a random
Right,
stranger walking
right,
around.
right, right, right. Do you feel like you are like laid out when you release a new book? Because it is, I feel like writing is very personal.
Right. I mean, writing a book feels like being laid out. Like I definitely, like a lot of authors, like write through the trauma, like write for the trauma,
Mm-hmm.
write to process the trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And it like my first books, I would just write like with tears streaming down my face. I would just be typing at midnight, of course. Um, and so I and like I think it was like a Hemingway quote, like you know, writing is so easy, you just like open the page or and bleed onto the page. And so that's really what it feels like, I think, for me at least, when I write anything that usually resonates with people, really it is sort of like the darker edge stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
so actually just I know we're not like quite there yet, but I thought that was something
Mm.
very interesting about the book we're going to be talking about, that that author and that book manages to do what I would definitely do with a dark spin, and it does it kind of with a lighter spin. So I'm always intrigued by that, but
Yes.
I personally
Yeah.
can't do it. I'm like, oh, we're gonna get dark.
Yeah. That's so funny. Do you go in waves of like wanting, I guess, darker stuff? But you're saying that most of the things that you want to write like have a happy ending or like kind of take you out, or there's a healing journey or something like that. But
Right.
do you go in waves? Because I feel like I am like, oh yeah, all the dark stuff. Then I'm like, if I don't read a book about like a beach vacation, like I'm gonna go crazy.
Oh, that's interesting. I do tend to stick to the darker stuff, to be honest with you. There's only a
Yeah.
few authors that can kind of tempt me over to the lighter
Mm,
side. And so then of course I'm really obsessed with them when I do find it. And I'm always like, just also from a craft perspective, curious like why that is, like why can they hold me in a storyline that I wouldn't read. But
did your reading of romance change when you became an author?
it's interesting. So I actually discovered romance via, like I said, historicals. And
Mm-hmm.
historicals, I feel like overall, but also specifically the historicals that I started with, but I also think overall just allow for what we very much would consider a dark theme. It when it's an historical, we're like, oh, that's just the times. And sometimes it is the times, but sometimes it's not really, and it actually happens today. But like so there's kind of like a different, I think, societal expectation of what a contemporary romance will be. Like a
Mm-hmm.
contemporary romance, we often, like, one of the words that I will sometimes use is like prescriptive. Like they're often judged to a standard of like, would I want to do this, or would I want my daughter to do this? Whereas when we look at historical romances, like that ideal kind of like flies out the window, and it's just sort of like we can open ourselves up to this window of like, oh, you know, she had to sell herself at auction to save her family from ruin. Like that makes total sense. Um, and so like it was funny for me because I entered via historical and then I moved to paranormal, where again things like that are very normal. Like the hero can just be like,
Yes.
I sense that you're my mate and I'm taking over the throne, and all of it, you know, so all of this stuff happens, and it's not actually labeled like a dark book. It's just like a book. It's just a
Mm-hmm.
regular standard genre, you know, romance book. And then when you do that kind of stuff in contemporary, like actually it surprised me because I was like, I love this stuff and I want to write it in contemporary. And I started writing and I was shocking everyone. Again, this was still early days, so that kind of stuff wasn't out as much either. And the thing is, I don't enjoy shocking people. Like I don't do it for the shock value. I'm kind of like, in fact, the funny thing is I used to like go to my very first book signing. I was obviously nervous, and anyone would be nervous at their first book signing. But I
Totally.
also was kind of like, people would come up and I'd be like, "Oh, do you like dark books?" And if they were like, "Yes, absolutely," I'd be like, "Cool, you might like this." But if they hesitated at all, I would have to say, "Oh no, like I don't think this is for you. I don't think it's for you." And then I actually found that I was accidentally reverse psychologying them. And they would be like, no, no, I'm interested. Let me see it. And I'd be like, no, I don't know. So I had to stop doing that just because like it was selling the book. Anyway,
That is so funny.
yeah,
Yeah, because this is so interesting to me because you're totally right. It's like in different genres, paranormal, historical, etc. There are these things that like people are like, well, as a 2024 woman, like I would never, I wouldn't want this to happen or couldn't see this happening or whatever. But yeah, what do you think is like the beauty of reading about that type of stuff? Like for me, it's like I feel like it defines our values more and like what you're interested in or what we're grateful for, or like I don't know. And like also just like it's imagination. It's like reading a book when you're a kid about pirates or whatever. Like,
Exactly. And I think, so, I mean, I think the romance genre is often like called the escapist genre. And I fully support that as an real value for people. But to be honest with you, I approach it from a different position because I think what it allows us to do is really, because what happens is when you're faced with something intense, like I just got kidnapped by pirates, then you really have to face your values way more than a situation where you're like, I have a good career and I have a nice family and everything is pretty fine. And do I want to take this trip or not? Like the stakes are much lower, right? So we can
mm-hmm,
kind of say, oh, I could go either way versus like the sort of more dramatic, high stakes
mm-hmm.
situation. You really have to confront those situations, sort of like. And then the other thing is, if you do have the sort of like fantasies or thoughts or like the what ifs, it's, and especially this comes with like sexual content, it's the safest way, the literal safest way to explore those things. Because, like
Yes.
if someone were to say, okay, I have this scenario I'm interested in, I just, it's been in my head, it kind of like is interesting. And if you say, well, how can I explore that? Well, first of all, you need to find a partner or multiple partners,
Mm-hmm.
and you need to have a safe word, and you need to do this, and you need to do that. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like, wait, I can actually do that from my armchair. You know what I mean?
Yes, yes. It really is a way to explore a lot of things. Like, I feel that with, you're right, like more sensitive scenes or tropes or sexual interests or kink or anything like that. But even just like, yeah, like expressing yourself in sexual situations, like you can gain so much from reading romance.
Yes. And I think, especially as someone who likes to walk that sort of like darker, forbidden taboo side, is
Yeah.
one of the themes I really love. Well, I love exploring redemption. That's one thing. And so
Mm-hmm.
something I challenge myself as an author, really with every book, is like, how far can I go before I can still feel that I can redeem him? And every author is going to have a different place, and every reader is going to have a different place. So like, but it's not a straight edge boundary, right? It's like a jagged boundary that we can explore the edges of.
Mm-hmm. I have one more question and then we can talk about the professor, but I'm just curious about, because you've been in this space for a really long time, what do you think about book talk and this like huge resurgence of reading for, I feel like we could say young women, but I think just reading is trendy right now, but reading romance, buying romance, talking about romance, like it's really it's having this resurgence that I don't think anyone could have predicted.
Right. No, I love it so much. Like I said, like I wish that I had known about romance sooner, you know? And
Mm-hmm,
so
me
the
too.
fact that now it is on the tables and when you walk in the store and people can discover it is magical. And the thing is, so it does come down to there's this book called Sapiens. It's like a nonfiction book, and it talks about like, oh, what is the difference between animals and humans? And a lot of people think it's language, but actually, when you look into it, animals have really complex languages, like words and grammar and things like that. And he sort of makes this point that it's story, and that story is this means of survival because a monkey can actually say, "Look up ahead, there's an eagle," and then other monkeys look up, right? But what a monkey can't say is, the other day when I was at the river, I saw a tiger. That's what they can't say. That's a story. And so it's like these stories of essentially survival, right? And so, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
now we're not trying to avoid the tiger. We're trying to avoid like the guy who's going to break our heart. But
Yes.
that's where we're reading, right? Like, and we're putting ourselves into these situations and saying, yeah, this is, yes, I love this grovel. I would accept this. Oh, no, I don't think that's enough, right? But we get to try those on. We get to like wear them
Yeah.
and be like, yeah, that
Yeah.
fits me or that doesn't fit me, in a way that's
Mm-hmm.
hard to do when we're just like sitting on our own, talking to a couple of friends, something like that.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah. I love that. So you released a new book this spring called The Professor, and you got to go on an international whirlwind book tour, which is so exciting. Can you tell us a little bit about The Professor?
Yeah, so The Professor is, as you might guess, a forbidden professor student romance. And it also has the ex boyfriend's father trope. which I have never written before. I have written a professor before, but I have not written that trope before. So that was very interesting to me. Of course, there's an age gap. There has to be if you're going to do that particular ex-boyfriend's father thing.
Mm-hmm.
Secret society, like many, I'm obsessed with like dark academia. And
Mm-hmm.
so I loved being able to just like really immerse myself in that world. And I think readers enjoy that part of it. I also really love to have some kind of like motif or other element. And so like another big series that I did was The Pawn was the first book, and it was all
Mm-hmm.
had a lot of chess, and it also had a lot of like Greek myths and Helen of Troy. And so I got to do like a deep research dive on that. And so this one, because he's a professor of Shakespeare, I got to do a deep dive on Shakespeare, and I really enjoyed that.
It's so fun because The Pawn was the first book of yours that I read, and I love some symbolism and some motifs in a book. It takes me back to like English 10 and stuff like that. We got a question from a listener about Professor at Sunsets and Dreams. Said, huge fan. Can you speak to the professor being a billionaire?
Yeah, so does come from a wealthy background, and he also has made a name for himself in his own right
Mm-hmm.
um, in terms of like being a scholar of Shakespeare. I
Mm-hmm.
think the other thing that I researched as part of this was Ivy League schools. And so it's at a fictional school that's essentially like an Ivy League school called Tanglewood University, in part because I already had a fictional city called Tanglewood that, so we can get to see the other characters, which I love doing. Um,
Me too. Love
but
that.
but I didn't go to an Ivy League school, so I did not really know. And so I kind of was like researching, and I guess I didn't quite know what I thought. I really actually thought it would be I knew that it would be more academically vigorous, right? Like it would just be harder, and everyone would be sort of maybe more serious and focused on grades and stuff. But I didn't know really about some of like the excesses and about some of the secret society stuff. And I mean, I think a lot of people like have obviously seen Gilmore Girls and the society that Logan is in. Do you remember what it's called? It's suddenly like
No, but why do I think about that society like once a week, even though I haven't watched the show in
it
like
was so
years.
iconic, and I think
Yes, yeah. Let me
and
look it
I
up.
wanted, and it just like her seeing entering that world where in a way, even though they were creating this sort of like capricious
Mm,
over the top society, they most of them came from that world of like wealth and excess, and Rory didn't she kind of did, but she kind of didn't. And so I really wanted to write that experience of someone coming into that space and being like, I don't belong here. Like I thought I belonged here because of the academic stuff,
mm-hmm.
but I'm realizing that maybe I don't belong here because of some of the societal stuff.
I love that. Because it's like why we liked watching Gossip Girl and stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that. I and just like all the gorgeous like rich colors and like all the bookshelves and like the spaces that people are in. It paints such a nice picture. Logan Society was the Life and Death Brigade.
Oh, yes. Yes.
That's iconic. It's so iconic. Yeah, that's so fun. Okay, I cannot wait to read that.
Like, so I was researching like some of the secret societies, and they're wild. I mean, some of the stuff you might be able to guess, but I was really surprised that like there's one secret society, maybe it's at Yale, that like not only do they have their events and stuff like on campus, but they also like separately own an island, the society. So like it's that kind of stuff where you're just like, oh my God. And then I did a little mention of one that I thought was very interesting, where they are the climbers. They tried to climb the buildings at night and sort of like
Yes.
scale them and sort of rate them for difficulty and things like that. So it
Yeah.
was just all very interesting.
I love that. I love that. And I love everything set at a university or a
Yes.
college campus. Yeah. Oh, that's so fun. So with the release of your new book, we are like, what should we talk about today? And you're like, let's do another professor student relationship, which this book, Need Me, is I feel like a really good intro to a more taboo subject like ex-boyfriend's father or like a bigger age gap and stuff like this, because this book depicts a professor student relationship, but they're very close in age. Like they're 20
Mhm.
and 25. So it's kind of like it's a good intro book, I would say, for if you want to explore that genre, but you're a little hesitant.
Yes, it's kind of like it's a very good starter book for that taboo. If you're kind of like, I haven't read Taboo, I'm curious, like this is a good safe space.
Yes, yeah, totally. So, spoilers ahead, we're going to be talking about Need Me, but we're not going to be talking about anything that's come before or after this one because it is part of a trilogy. So, let's talk about the book. It was written by Tessa Bailey. It was written in April of 2015. This was really shocking to me because I feel like it holds up like a book talk 2020 to 2024 book. Also, just that I feel like sometimes people that are new to the romance genre or new to Tessa Bailey, you think, oh, she's just had these hits, like hit after hit, and this huge success in recent years. But it's like, man, you have to grind at your designation or your work. Like it's not just like an instant success. Like I feel like Book Talk kind of makes it out to be. It's like you're grinding for years. So
Oh yeah, and I think it's like it's not like a breakout book, it's a succession of breakout books because really Tessa in a way like burst onto the scene. But when I say burst onto the scene, I'm like, okay, the very sort of smallish core people in Romance Landia knew about her right away.
totally.
But then okay, then she broke out a little bit more, and then she broke out a little bit more, and then I do think it was like it happened when Summer was kind of like the oh my God, take over the world kind of thing. But I'm kind of like, I knew her when, not
Yeah,
so.
yeah. No, I feel like I say that about Maddie. I'm like, I knew her when she had 2,000 TikTok followers, you guys. So, like,
Yeah.
okay, so we meet Honey, our female main character. She's a pre med student at Columbia in New York. She's from Bloomfield, Kentucky. Very like a small town story where she is trying to do something with her life. Like she wants to break out of her small town and really do something. And I really like those stories. And she has to take an English course, and it's taught by this very sexy professor, Ben Dawson.
No, I really love that. And I won't go like too much into it, but I do really love that the three books, the two other books connected to this follow a set of women who like become unlikely roommates. And
Yes.
I do know like readers tend to love, and I do love them too. It's not that I don't. Like Brothers is very popular, but I have like a special place in my heart for like the girl gang.
No, that's so true. That's so true. Yeah, you're right, brother. Like books that cover like a set of three brothers or something like that. Yeah, I would much prefer the girlies in New York. So, because she lives with Roxy and Abby, which are her roommates, and they help her out because she's like, okay, you guys, I'm obsessed with my English professor. Like, it's gonna be a mission to seduce him. So she gets help from them picking out like an outfit to wear to class. This feels so relatable. Like
It does. It does.
she goes to class, and it's really interesting because he is 25 and he's a professor. And I saw criticism online being like, a prof wouldn't be 25 years old. Definitely think that's on the young side, but I'm like, no, there's definitely profs that are that just like sequentially do their schooling, like undergrad, master's, PhD, very quickly and end up working at colleges
Right.
and
And like,
teaching.
and he's going to be, I don't actually remember exactly what he was, but like, he's not going to be the tenured professor, right? He's the new guy.
Totally, totally. He's the new guy teaching like an intro to
Yeah.
English, like
Yeah.
100 or whatever. Yeah, and I was also just remembering like some of the profs that I had when I went to school, and it was like they were teaching, but they were concurrently doing their masters or something like that. So I was like, okay, that's like not a gripe and grumble that I have. But because he's so young, he's like, I have to keep some distance between me and the students. So I'm going to like cut off access. I'm going to like not learn any of their names, kind of be a little bit distant, really just like go in, teach, and leave, which I thought was very smart. But he's like, okay, I'm reading these assignments of all these students. They're good, but there's one that's really standing out to me, and it's by one of the students, Honey Parabo, and he just loves everything that she's writing and submitting.
Yeah. I love that. And I think it's not about like the fact that she's writing poetry in like some, because she's, first of all, she's a med student. So this really is like probably the one English class she's going to take her entire college
Yes,
career.
yeah, this is a prerequisite she couldn't get out of.
Exactly. So I think it's like, it's not that he's drawn to like her knowledge of Shakespeare or something. Like that's not what it is, which is what it is in mine. But like that's a completely different scenario because that's her major. He is drawn to like, I think the authenticity and the fact that I think a little bit of like
Yes.
her small town girl vibes is that, as opposed to maybe like other people in New York City who like don't have it or something. I don't know, have more of a veneer.
Totally, because she writes these pieces, and like they're included in the book. There's one about things that she carries, and it was interesting because again, he was kind of lamenting that most of the students were like quite literal or like didn't have like the depth or the vulnerability that Honey is sharing in her writing, which yeah was very sweet. But her seduction attempts they're thwarted because they get interrupted by another colleague, Peter, before she has a chance to say anything but his name.
I have a question for you. If you are going to write the things I carry,
Yeah.
did you think at all about like what you would write?
Okay, so it's so funny. Yeah, yes, I did. But okay, it's so funny. I was literally just thinking that this morning. So it's like, I think when I was younger, I used to carry around like in my wallet, like this little token that my grandma gave me. It was like an archangel or something for like safety. And then I was thinking like I had like an old ticket stub
Mhm.
of I can't even remember what the ticket was for in my wallet and stuff like that. So it's like I was like, "Oh, I used to be able to write something like things I carry." And then nowadays it's like literally like my phone, my wallet, my Carmex, like like nothing of sentimental, like my EpiPen. Like,
Well, that's important. Yeah. I
yeah.
mean,
Yeah. What about you? What would you write? Would you be able to write something like moving about the things that we carry?
I don't know. I mean, not when I was in college. I'll say that. I hadn't processed anything in college. You know what I mean?
Mhm. Mhm.
So, I do carry my dogs, not that they enjoy that. I carry them around, but like, no, I mean, I think if I were going to write a more serious piece about it, it would be that I carry my mother's face and I see her when I look in the mirror.
I love
Yeah.
that. I love that. Yeah, I definitely think I was like when I think about things I carry as a metaphor, I'm like I definitely carry like I think we could say we carry like the weight of the world or we carry things that people have told us that
Mm,
impact us or things that we've experienced that have impacted us.
yeah.
Like I feel like I could write something nice, but like the way that she tied it into like to be the physical and the
Exactly.
metaphorical, I was like God, I don't know if I could do that right now. I'm very
Exactly.
literal. Like
Yeah, no, you could definitely, it was compelling what she wrote. So,
Totally. So yeah, her seduction is thwarted, but lucky for her, Roxy and Abby are throwing a party that weekend, and we don't know this, and she doesn't know this, but Ben is friends with Roxy's boyfriend, Louis. In my head, I said Louis because he's, I think, kind of rich.
that is so funny. I don't know. I actually don't know. I probably would have said Lewis, but to be honest with you, like I'm so bad at people's names in books. I'm just like, oh, that guy, like
Oh, same. No, literally, I was on a podcast the other day and I was talking about what I was reading, and the host said, "Oh, what's the main character's name?" And I was like, it literally took me like 3 minutes to think of it, and I was like, I just finished reading it. Like it's so bad. In one ear, out the other.
but see, like I could say a detail about their lives. You know what I mean? I know who you're
Of
talking about,
course,
but like the name
totally.
is, I don't know.
So we have our like maybe first official meet cute because Honey goes into a storage room to get something for the party and she kind of stumbles and makes like a noise, and Ben is arriving at the party at the same time, hears her and goes to check to see if she's okay. But when he enters the room, he accidentally locks them in and it's like pitch black, and they kind of start talking and like flirting with each other, and then they like hook up, they make out. I was like, I just don't see myself being stuck in a closet with someone and being like, I guess I'll just hook up with them. Like,
So I think it's like, well, so she knows though. I think
she
like
knows
she
it's
knows.
Ben. Yes, yes.
So it's a little bit different because like this is what she's been thinking about, really. Like
True, true,
she's like
true,
wanting
true.
it, and here it is, just happens. Him, I don't know, just a dude, really. What can you say? Like,
No, that's so true because she's more like kind of pursuing him because she knows it's him, but she doesn't know he doesn't know it's her. So yeah, you're right. He's just there for the ride, which
well, I
I
think he's
appreciate.
right, exactly. Well, he's only doing it because it's anonymous, right? Because he wouldn't do it if he knew it was her. Like, it's like the safety is the anonymity, but little does he know.
It's his favorite student. So the roommates rescue them, and Ben's like, oh my God, like, this is my worst nightmare. This is exactly what I've been trying to avoid because Honey isn't a stranger, but, the author of some of my favorite assignments in my class. And so he's really freaked out. He talks to a colleague, Peter, and Peter advises him, like, if you want to get ahead of this, you should send a letter to the administration, say that she's making advances toward you, and just like get it on record that you are like not trying to pursue this.
The letter of doom.
Tell me about the letter.
Oh my gosh. I will just say this, like when I was listening to the school issue podcast on Maddie's Park to Car Convos. And
Mm-hmm.
so the school issue at my school was that someone told on one of the teachers for just like looking at her wrong and like looking at her friends wrong. And it
Mm-hmm.
was the most awkward because I guess like they didn't fire him, like nothing, like I mean, I'm sure they had a talking to or whatever. And he then, for the rest of the school year, made us all face forward, and someone else would go around and pick up our work, and someone else would go up and drop off our work, and it was just like the most intensely awkward thing for everyone.
Oh my God.
I know.
Oh my God, I can't believe it. But yeah, this was one thing in the book that I was like, could have done without the letter, or like just like I don't know, what would be the alternative of like I think for me, like I guess his job's on the line, but he like also kind of has an offer at NYU. I feel like he's young in his career, so that's like tough, but she's also a student young in her career. I think maybe it's like, I mean, like this was something happened and it was an accident, but I just want to note that, like, I don't know, this happened. I have no idea what the
Right. I
alternative
do
is.
think that the letter could have been written differently. It could
Yeah.
have been written softer. Um,
Yes.
but and the thing is, I kind of feel like no one's like, cool, this is a cool letter, right? Like it's not a good, it doesn't make us feel good. Like nothing about it. It's kind of like scary and intense sort of early on in the experience. But I guess I can just sort of see how it's understandable from his point of view. Like again,
Yeah.
not like supporting it, not being like I
Yeah.
enjoyed
Yeah.
that. Just
Yeah.
like I guess I can see how you got there.
Yes, I can see the logic, even though I don't agree with like
Don't
what
like it.
happened.
No.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and also arguably like asshole. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
sometimes
yeah,
it's just
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think people also, in one moment, with the information that's presented to them, and talking to a like kind of like a mentor or like a colleague that you trust and you're getting advice from, you make a decision that you regret in
right.
when you have more information.
But also I believe at that point he doesn't send it. So he writes it and is like, I'll just hold off.
Yeah, I think he sends it to Peter.
Oh yeah, to look at it.
Because yes, because it's revealed at the end that he submits it further. But I think it was just kind of like, hey, I documented this. Like, can you witness this? He didn't think it
Mm,
was really necessarily going to go like further. And actually be like acted on. But Honey doesn't know that this is happening, obviously. So she is still trying to get to know Ben after this steamy kiss in the storage room. And she's like, I know where he's going to be. It's a poetry reading at the school. So she goes and she sees Ben, but he's with a colleague, and they're kind of being a little bit touchy, even though he's not trying to flirt with her. Maybe she likes him a little bit, but it sparks Honey's jealousy, and she sees a random guy there, and she's like, basically pretend to know me, pretend that we're here together just to make Ben jealous. During the reading, Honey leaves and she like walks down like a hallway. She's all alone. It's somewhere more quiet. And Ben pursues her and they end up hooking up kind of like it's like kind of like a classroom type thing. Very cat and mouse. I really liked this part. Yeah. What did you think?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's really interesting because we had mentioned that this book is a good like starter book for someone who just wants to maybe dip their toe into something a little bit forbidden. And I think part of what makes it safer is that she pursues him. So even though it's maybe we're not used to as much seeing that in our romance books, like the fact is that's a part of what makes it safer is that she's doing the pursuing. But then he does. I mean, but we also need him to like pursue back a little bit, right?
Totally,
like
totally.
So yeah, no, I enjoyed that.
It's the agency that she has in this relationship that might be lacking in other ones that makes it safer, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they hook up, they have sex. Tessa Bailey can write a sex scene.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's how she like burst onto the scene when she first did, because and it was just like known as the queen of dirty talk. And I feel like she still is, but that's not as much like how she's known. But she still is.
It is, I feel like, if you want, because I feel like people either like, yeah, closed door, or they like more heavy on the romance, or like more heavy on like the erotica. And I feel like the heavy on the erotica people, I feel like would like a Tessa Bailey novel.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. They are steamy. And I actually think that hers was because they had started the trend of doing, sort of regular contemporary romance with illustrated covers, but those books tended to be more tame. And then they came out with It Happened One Summer, and that is, fully explicit. And they put an illustrated cover on that. And so like people were shocked. I think a lot in a good way. But maybe some not in a good way.
Yeah, totally. What do you think, not to take us out of the book, but what do you think the like long-term like outcomes of that would be? Because you're right, like I think people are shocked. People are like, oh, I didn't know I liked this. But I feel like in 10 years we could be like having a conversation about like really what the implications of this have been.
That's a really interesting question. I personally, I mean, I see all of our books as art. And so, I mean, the one thing that, is reasonable to worry about is like not making sure they're not shelved in YA or something, which does occasionally happen now that we have like more self-published books.
Yes.
I think I heard, I don't know if you've heard of H.D. Carlton's books, but they're very dark. And, booksellers don't understand that. So they just kind of like put it in YA and like, no, not that. But ultimately, I think it's a good thing for it to be out there. I think when we hide things from people, like there's multiple levels of like why that's problematic on its own, because like but one of them that strikes me is the like message of infantilization of women, because in a like a CVS or a Walmart or whatever, you could have a horror novel or a Stephen King novel or a kind of a thriller where, murder happens. But then we're like, but a grown woman can't read this. She can't handle it. It's like, so I love that it's available. I love that it's available. And, if it's not anyone's jam, then I don't want them to have to read it. But also there's a lot of books that they can read, And so, yeah, I just love that it's out there. And again, normalizing it, because at the end of the day, we still live in a pretty puritanical society. So if you
absolutely,
you can go to your friend or a friend group or brunch and say, you know what, he did this thing where he was like supposed to take me out and he just watched football. You can say that and you can kind of get us like some opinions and thoughts, and then you can make your decision. But how do you say like, I don't know, he tried this thing and I didn't really like it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, are we even having conversations like that? Are we normalizing them if they don't even show up in art?
Yeah, oh, that's so true. And it's like also, or like if you're asking for something, how do you know that that's going to be received in a good way if you're not seeing that in books or like just different options for you? Yeah, oh my God, I just feel like the romance genre has given me so many things that I'm just really happy that I've been able to experience, I guess.
Yeah, no, I mean, and so some like sometimes it will get flack because people will say like, oh, it gives women unrealistic expectations. And like the answer, I think, from like all of Romance Landia has just been like, babe, if that seems unrealistic to you to get like 3 orgasms, then like find a new guy, you know? Like it just like
Hmm.
it's not unrealistic for a lot of women. And but we don't talk about that, right? Like it's
Yeah.
so it kind of it does normalize something good, really.
Yeah, it's really showing where the bar needs to be because right now it's extremely low. And I feel like people are like, because I do think, and actually, I was reading some Tessa Bailey interviews to prep for this podcast, and that's what she was kind of saying. She was kind of like, I feel like books have opened people's eyes up to like demand more in relationships, which is, yeah, just so interesting.
No, and I think there's this sort of like sitcom style idea that like, oh, the men always wanted and the women never wanted, and oh, I have a headache, right? We're always giving excuses instead of like,
Yeah.
well, why don't we want it? Is it like not a good time? Because then that's understandable, right? Little female empowerment.
No, truly, truly. Okay, so they hook up, but Ben kind of gets cold feet, and there's a moment where he uses. So they're at a bar, and he uses his colleague Viv to kind of shut down Honey's like future advantages, because he saw that it made her angry or jealous at the poetry night. Justice for Viv. Truly, I feel like it sucks being the like we need the Viv book, like, but
For real, for real.
like it sucks being used in this way of like trying to convey a message without like using words or like having the conversation, which I thought was kind of showing his age a little bit. But Honey gets really upset, and her roommates are trying to confront her. Meanwhile, she gets a call from her family, and they're just like, hey, back at the homestead, things aren't going well because our family's tractor broke your brother's leg, and we need like help around the house and I guess the business. And she's like, I'm gonna go back to Bloomsfield just for like a week or two. I can just do all my assignments remotely and catch up when I get back. And her roommates are like, are you sure you're not running away from the Ben situation? And she's like, no. But it's like, I feel like when you're in times of strife, you're just like, yeah, I want my mom, or I want my house that I grew up in, my childhood bedroom. I just want comfort. And so she heads back to Kentucky.
And the other thing is, it kind of shows us that she is actually quite like a tomboy and also was like active in the farm. She knows how to work the tractor. She knows how to do what her brother was doing. Like this was not like an idle thing for her. It really like immerses us in who she was before she came to college.
This really makes me like her so much more because it's like not only is she super smart and like a go-getter and a hard worker and stuff like that, she's creative. We see that with her writing assignments, but also she can do all the farm work too. Like that's just really impressive. It's really impressive.
Yeah, I'm very envious of like her energy, you know, like she just seems like she has a lot.
No, seriously. Seriously. And I just like when she's like, I made my mind up and I'm gonna do this. She's very like matter of fact and like self-assured, and I really liked that about her. Cause even when he like kind of rejects her in this way, she's upset, but it's not about like, oh, I'm not like he didn't choose me or whatever. It's kind of just like, man, if he didn't want to pursue me or date me or whatever, like he should have talked to me. And this was a shitty way to do it.
It was a shitty way to do it. And I think it kind of, the whole thing about this sort of taboo thing goes to the heart of like what we're looking for in characters, because like she's walking that line of, okay, we want them to have an interesting life or we wouldn't want to read this book. But on the flip side,
Yes.
okay, they're also going to be making mistakes. That's going to like cause these issues and having, you know, the reader having all these feelings.
Totally, totally. I know I always like try to fix I'm like, why did they put this like bad thing that the character did? And it's like, well, it's like because you wouldn't want to read the book if they didn't include some of these things. Like, I always have to remind myself that. He decides to head to Bloomfield to win Honey back. And while he's en route, he gets her like final assignment from that he had assigned last week, and it was talking about how her family is like a baseball team. Again, she's using these like metaphors to describe how she doesn't feel like she fits in on this team, and like the kind of place setting is a local baseball field that when she was young, her and her friends fixed up because it was like run down, and they decided to like get the community together to fix it all up. So he arrives while Honey is at a pub seeing her old friends, and she's realizing at this time that she no longer fits into this friend group and this kind of world. But Ben storms into the bar and finds her, and at the time she has Elmer's arm around her, which Elmer, I could not pick out if he was an ex-boyfriend or just a friend who liked her and wanted to date her. But I was like, why does he just keep popping up?
He's very interested. That's a
Yeah.
good point. Yeah. I don't know how far it had gone. He might just be interested.
Yeah, because he like calls her in New York and like updates her on all the gossip and stuff like that. But I don't think maybe they had dated in the past, but she has like no interest in him. I liked this quote. Honey's like, "What do you want, Ben?" And he says, "For starters, I'd really like you not to have this guy's arm around you." Classic, like, touch her, I'll kill you vibes. He's like, I like want to discuss this. I like you. I want to date you. I want to meet your family. And he's like, I'm going to be staying at a nearby motel. But her mom is like, no, we're like known for our Southern hospitality. She would kill you if you didn't stay with us. So like, come meet the family. And he's like, oh my gosh, I've never met someone's like a significant other's parents. But it goes surprisingly well. I was expecting there's some like maybe apprehension from the dad, but I was like, oh, this is going to be the third act breakup. Like the family is going to hate him. That's not the case.
No, the family was really nice, actually. And I thought that was
Yeah,
interesting because I think we would be expecting it to be worse.
totally, totally. But and they're all kind of like jabbing him a little bit because he talks really fancy because he's the English professor, and he is staying in a room, her brother's room, and he starts giving her a massage because she's been working out on the farm, which leads to more touching. They can't get enough of each other, but they stop each other because they're like, "Okay, your parents are like literally down the hallway." The next day, this is like my favorite part.
It's
of the
my
book,
favorite part too. It's my favorite part too.
because it's the big romantic gesture that isn't very big at all, but he lets her sleep in and like turns off her alarm and does all the work for her, very acts of service as his love language.
I mean, is that not the dream? Like, is that
No,
not the
that's
dream?
the dream. Like, I think it's the dream also because it's like it's realistic. Like that could very much happen to someone. But that afternoon when all the work is done, Honey shows him her favorite place, which is the baseball field. And they get it on in the baseball field. Some public sex, some kind of field sex. He uses his professor voice.
But I think what's so compelling about this part is that when you're there in New York, that is very much his world because he is an academic and they're at a university. And so whereas when they're there, it's her world. And there is a different kind of guy who would be like, dirt, like I'll help you by paying someone to do this, but I'm not gonna get my hands dirty. And he's like, no, I'm gonna figure out how to do this tractor, you know?
That's so true. And just like the persistence, because the whole point of her coming was that it's like a tractor that's like passed down from generations that the average person, they couldn't hire an external person to come run it. Like it had to be her. So he like takes the whole morning, learns how to do it, does all the work, And you're right, like kind of changes for her, I would say.
Yeah, actually, that's something I feel like that Tessa Bailey is known for is writing a lot of blue collar heroes.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not about the billionaire, or even if they have money, kind of having more of a blue collar vibe, or like, yeah.
Yeah, because we learn later on that Ben does have money.
No, the funniest money reveal ever was It Happened One Summer. Did you read that one? Or do you?
No,
Okay,
no,
I
but
won't,
can
I
you?
won't.
No, no, I
No.
want to know.
Okay,
Okay.
it's basically like did you know this? It's like a Schitt's Creek. Uh, okay, yeah. So it's
Yes,
like
yes, yes.
gets in trouble and gets sent, but not like with her family to the small town. Instead, she gets sent away with her sister to the small town to fix up this thing. And she meets this fisherman, and he's like got a cap, and he's grumpy, and he does when he does acts of service, he like makes stuff for her with his hands. He's a fisherman. He's a fisherman, and the whole story is about like this you know, dichotomy between her like glamour and beauty and high society hijinks, and his like, I like to go out and fish with my men, and some of us die. Like her father actually died doing this. Like it's like we like to face the sea. It's very important.
Mm-hmm.
And then like towards the end, she's like, it's okay. I love you. We can live on whatever. And he's like, I don't know why you thought I was poor. And she's like, well, like you're a fisherman. He's like, no, no, we make a lot. He sort of, I think, goes into some kind of detail to be like, yeah, no, what I'm completely
No,
like,
yeah, like
way.
this is almost hobby for me at this point. No, I love that the
Uh,
fish business is booming. No, but isn't that what we all want? It's like you have the values and the soul of like a blue collar worker, but but you don't have to have the rags. You get the rags to riches stories all in one. Like
yes. Mm-hmm.
that's so funny. I like that. I will eventually read it. I had actually only read one of Tessa Bailey's novels before this. So this was also really fun just to see what everyone is talking about. I find with some of the really popular like book talk books, I read them much later because all of the hype is like almost too overwhelming, and
It's
I just
hard.
kind of it's
Yeah.
really hard. I'm like I want to make my own opinions. Also, there's just so much to read that I'm like, okay, yes, I want to read this, but I also have a TBR of like 400 books that I got to
Mm-hmm.
get through. So, but I think that this scene is also really good what you were talking about before about exploring something a little bit more taboo, because in a safe way, because she's like, I thought you're so hot when you were lecturing and when you like pushed your glasses up on your face and like all of these things. And yeah, they get to like kind of role play this student professor relationship, but in like a really safe and consensual way. And I think that's beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm there for it.
But they fall asleep, whoops, and wake up in the morning. It's Honey's birthday, her 20th birthday, and he's like, I didn't have time to buy you a gift because I didn't know it was your birthday. And she says all she wants from him is a piece of his writing because she has got to read all of hers, which is very, very cute. Meanwhile, Ben decides, like, because he was like, I want to take the NYU job, so Honey can have her career or her like school career at Columbia, but I'm going to make sure that like everything's good before I send in my resignation. So I'm going to do that. But unfortunately, Peter sends the letter that Ben had wrote mere weeks ago, and Honey gets kicked out of school and all of her funding gets rescinded. So they get into like a huge argument. The family's there. Elmer's there. Ben punches him. He flees back to New York. She's trying to figure it out. And they eventually do figure it out. The dean retracts the expulsion. Honey gets to keep her spot as a student. Ben gets to continue his career at NYU.
When he follows her, he is
Yes.
he is basically saying to himself, I'm choosing her.
Yes.
And he's lining up the ways that's going to work because they can't be together like this. So he's like, I'm going to take this other job so that, she can stay here and we can be together though romantically. even if we're, now in different universities and or because of that. But I don't think he tells her. He's not like, I'm picking you.
No.
Like shows up and is like, I'm gonna let you sleep in, and then we're gonna have the field sex. And so then when she has this terrible news, it feels like, oh my God, you're just using me in the worst possible way, because not only did you come here and we had field sex, but then you separately sent a note about it to the dean. That's what it feels like, is that it's happening all at the same time and on purpose.
That's such a good point, because he's like decided that he wants to date her, and you're right, he's lining everything up so they're able to do that when they go back to New York. But because like it's like he didn't say this stuff about Viv, and then he didn't say this stuff. And it's like, if you would have just had a conversation, so many books are like, if you would have just had a conversation, none of this would happen. But of course, we don't want to just read a book about a conversation.
I know. And it's interesting. Yeah. I mean, it's like, guys, man. I mean, he's 25. He's 25.
Yeah.
I mean, what
Mm-hmm.
he's making a big enough step of saying, I'm gonna like change the course of my career so we can be together.
Mm-hmm.
So, he did not spell it out. He did not make any kind of declarations to
Mm-hmm.
her. But it's again also just like, it's not good. But you can kind of see where he's coming from.
His thought process.
He's not like an exceptionally emotionally aware or communicative guy, but
Mm-hmm.
that's
But
just,
he gets there.
he gets there. He gets there.
He gets there because written word is obviously maybe a better form of communication for him. So when they're back in New York, Ben gets the friend group to help him plan a surprise for Honey. And it's that he purchased a baseball field for her and wrote her this, which is like obviously a big romantic gesture, but the real romantic gesture is the letter that he writes. And it's basically the letter that he should have written to the dean about how much he loves her and loves her mind and her grit and stuff like that, in replacement of the letter.
Yeah. So he, like you had mentioned, he, convinces the dean to sort of change things up and let her
Mm-hmm.
back in, which is important. And then I also thought, like, he was not quite like a billion. I got the impression, I don't know if this is true or not, that like he had this amount of money that was, I think, like, inherited or something like that. And that he really had to use all of it or most of it to do this purchase. So it was a bigger gesture in that way. I mean, I love writing billionaires. I love reading them, but it's a downside because they have so much that it's kind of like, oh, you just bought me a hotel. Cool. Well, you can buy like, a
You could
hundred of
buy,
them.
yes, yeah. You're right, but he's kind of more, he's the average Joe with a little bit of money, and you're right, this is like a big splurge. But I was like, also, you'll do fine in your
Exactly.
NYU tenure. Like, you'll, both of you will do fine. She'll be a doctor, and he'll be the department head one day or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's very sweet because, again, it just shows you about, yeah, something that she cares about so much. That's been like this kind of through line in her childhood that now she has in New York, a place that she really fits in to more than Bloomfield.
So he makes the grand gesture. We always love a grovel and a grand gesture.
We love a grovel. We love the big apology, and we love a happily ever after.
And he made some mistakes, but you can't have a grovel without mistakes.
Yeah, the payoff is sweet. The payoff is sweet, even though it was a little torturous to get here. Okay, let's get into our roundtable discussion. Our internet investigation. This is our cursory peruse of the internet of things you need to know. Listened and watched and read some Tessa Bailey interviews that I thought were interesting. She said, I started reading romance when I was 14. I was at a really boring family reunion in Maine. Not that Maine is boring, which I was like, oh, I wonder if that's why, because Hook, Line, and Sinker looks very Maine coded. So that makes sense. And she said, I stumbled upon a copy of Hidden Fires by Sandra Brown. It was in my grandmother's luggage, like you said at the beginning of the app. And I read it cover to cover in one sitting. And I was like, what is this? It was a good introduction to romance because I didn't realize this was what I had been searching for in every kind of story my whole life, whether it was movies or TV shows or just regular books I was reading in school. I was like, where's the romance plot? I was always looking for it, and I just didn't realize that there's a whole genre for it. That's where it all started. That is so relatable to me. Like, I'm like, should I go to this movie? Well, do the characters get together in it? So I'm like, why didn't I try reading romance earlier when I was always seeking the romance plot in every TV show or movie?
Yeah. And I think, and one of the reasons why, like, it's like our society is so perverse that, like, oh, because they get together, it's not real art. If everyone is sad at the end, then it's art. And it's like a really, like, it's part of the patriarchy, really. And it's like, oh no, it's actually still art. And a friend said this to me once, that it was similar to certain forms of cooking, like home cooking, because actually professional chefs is still very male dominated, but the sort of like
Yes,
home
yes.
cooking being passed down from mothers to daughters, and also quilting as something that's like an art form that has just not necessarily been valued by society, but it survives based on just like the women's love of it.
Yeah. That's literally so beautiful. And I guess that's like the love of reading truly came from my mom, and I think my mom's mom and stuff like that. Couldn't agree more. And just like you're right that it's such a dismissed, like pop culture, like a lot of women's interests, it's just so dismissed in the public eye as something that's like valid and worth something. Because yeah, people always talk about guilty pleasure reading, vacation reading, beat summer. What's the word I'm looking for? Like a summer book,
Yeah, like a beach read,
beach
or like
read,
what
yeah,
used to be, that's not as common now, but like chick lit,
chick
or
lit,
the fact that women's fiction is called women's fiction, but men's fiction is just called fiction.
fiction. Totally,
um,
totally.
Actually, I think what's really interesting too, because we were talking about Taylor Swift, and I think it was the Time article
Mm-hmm.
that said something about how what she is doing is centering the interior of women, and maybe even young girls in particular, and showing that that's important. That's important enough for us all to talk about and create art about. And for so long, it's been the exact opposite. Like, girl is an insult, right? Like, oh, you're doing that
Mm-hmm.
like a girl.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, we're reclaiming that.
Absolutely, yeah. I really feel like this year, in particular, women's art, or just like people are realizing how nice it is to be in like female dominated spaces, or just we always knew that that's the ideal, but like we just didn't have access to it, and now we're having more access, and we're realizing it's something that is super needed. And I feel like that even with book talk, like it's such a online community, and it has its problems for
Mm-hmm.
sure, but like yeah, an online community of people just like having something immediately to click over and to discuss. And even though it's such a diverse genre, there's always something you can connect with another person on.
So my background is actually, I majored in computer science,
Mm-hmm.
and I was a complete tomboy. I had a black belt, everything. So I'm like all dudes all the time, right? It's just like around me. And so when I discovered the romance genre, it was so welcoming. It was so warm. I went to my first author convention, but I also, like, there are book signings, that like big book signings that readers can go to and make friends, and they're passing out, they're exchanging friendship bracelets just like at Taylor Swift concerts. And the thing is, yeah, sometimes it'll be like, oh, we have drama, but like, here's the thing, this is kind of formative for me. But like early, before I graduated from college or anything like that, there was this woman. So it was like 1990s or something. This woman was just talking about UI design. So like literally where buttons go, the design of it. And she was getting so many death and other kind of threats, including being doxxed, including them coming to her house,
Mm-hmm.
that she had to close it down. The police were involved. And so I'm like, we'll be like, oh, we'll call it drama because like someone's not talking to someone, or someone will call out problematic behavior. Be like, oh, there's so much drama. And I'm like, no, that's just like people being people, or necessary. I'm like, the drama that is in male dominated spaces is like literally dangerous.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
they don't necessarily call it drama. They're just like it's just a thing that women sort of have to expect, really.
experience. I
Yeah.
know, I know,
Yeah.
I know.
So I love the romance world and I love being surrounded by women. And I just find it to be the most supportive community I've ever experienced.
Yeah, yeah, I cannot believe how much my life has also changed, or my relationships have also changed since talking more about romance. Because I started really just like, I would say in like, was it 2019 or 2020? So again, recent. And then, but I didn't talk about it really until 2023, I would say. And then it's like, oh, friends I have known for decades are like, oh, I read these books. Oh, I've read this book. I like, and now it's like, there's a new layer to our relationship. There is where we can discuss just like so much, like have in depth, really in depth conversations about this that just wasn't, available, or
Yeah.
like I just didn't know before because, yeah, of the, I guess, taboo nature, or like like the shame, I
Yeah.
guess, around talking about it publicly. Yeah, that's part of this podcast too, is like, because sometimes it is, I feel like that burbles up because I'm like, oh my God, I'm saying this publicly. I'm on video. I'm talking to someone I might not know in real life.
Mhm.
And I am trying to like push through some of those things because it really has pushed me out of my comfort zone in a good way, and really destigmatized a lot
Mhm.
of, because like also in books it's like, oh, I respect this character so much and she's asking for this, or she's doing this, or
Mhm.
she's centering her pleasure in this way, and it's like I had never just seen that, I'd never witnessed that ever.
Exactly.
And like, yeah, so it's
Like it's a
just,
form of representation, right? That we hadn't seen.
totally, totally,
No, it's so
yeah.
funny. I was like obviously in a closet when I first started writing. It was like a pen name and it's secret and everything. And I also like didn't know if it was going to be my career going forward. Like I thought I was going to go back to work as like, a software developer. And so I was kept it very hush hush. Plus, I started writing really like dark and forbidden books very early. So I was just like, this is a secret. But my husband was so supportive. Plus, he cannot keep a secret to save his life. So um, he told everyone. He told people in our family. He told his
Yeah,
coworkers.
yeah,
My son was like, raised his hand in class. My mom is an author. And,
I love it.
and he tells me this and I'm like cringing. And he's like, yeah, she asked me what your name was. And I said, Skye Warren. And I was like, oh God.
That is so funny. No, but you're totally right. Like, because your first reaction is almost like a cringe or like a wave of shame or embarrassment or whatever. And it's like you just, even years into it, I feel like that still comes up. And I feel like you're constantly working your way to like a place that has no shame and like stuff like that. And
Yeah, and
it's
I
so
really have to
interesting.
say, and I did, reach a point where now I'll say it. If someone asks me what I do, I'll say author. I don't like volunteer. I write the kind of books that are steamy. I don't volunteer that. I'm like, I'm an
You're like, here's
author.
the name,
I
here's the
know.
subject matter.
and
Like,
and then they'll be like, well, what kind? And I will say romance. And and I actually in person have never had a bad reaction to that. Like in online, I think there can be some nastiness, and in like media, I think it's sort of like
mm-hmm.
almost clickbait actually to do
Yep.
that. But in
Yep.
person, I've not had a bad reaction. So that has been very nice. Because I was definitely worried.
Oh yeah, totally, totally. Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting. Cause yeah, I would be too, just because of the way that we've been shown and taught about romance and sex and everything. Like, yeah.
I was going to tell you a funny story. So I used to, like earlier in my author career, I would do a lot of giveaways, which I still do actually, but I would also like, I didn't really know about USPS pickup or whatever. So I'd be literally taking myself over to the USPS, store, and I'd stand in line with my little tote bag of like packages. And it's very clear that there's a book in them, it's an envelope with the book. And I would do this repeatedly, and they never ask what's in it or whatever, because like they're just like people who are doing their job. But then they see me, they know me, whatever. And at some point
Mm.
she's just like, oh, like what are in these? And I'm like, books. And she's like, what kind of books? But then she doesn't wait for me to answer. She says, Bibles. Yeah, I didn't tell her. I think it was early. I didn't say, oh no, it's romance. I was just like, no, not Bibles. It's not Bibles. Anyway.
You're like similar, very similar. Like, You're like, you could say in some way, yes. Like,
Oh gosh.
fuck, that's so fucking funny. Oh my god. That's a good story. Okay, Tessa Bailey, she basically just there's another quote that I found that I really liked. Basically just saying that like yes, everyone thinks people read romance novels because of the sexy scenes and the spice, but it's not always that in these books. Someone's listening to you, they are taking your taste, your interest, and how you feel about things, cataloging them and remembering them later down the road and calling them back. It makes you feel fully listened to and fully seen. That is actual romance. And I thought that really described this book, and I'm assuming all of her other books as well.
Yes, and I actually think it's a good callback to the idea that like, oh, why do the women in romance books usually have such good sex? Is it because like is it unrealistic, or are these men just sort of like preternaturally good at it? But I think
Yeah.
why they are good at it is because they are watching and listening for her reactions. They're not just invested in their own pleasure. And
Yes.
sometimes you'll
Yeah.
actually see authors, spell that out. Like he was like roaming and watching and testing, and whenever a spot, would make her cry out, he would stay there, and like that's what makes it good.
Yeah. I just wish everyone understood that. Like, oh my God. Okay, our Wonder Whys, these are unanswered questions for the listeners. I have two. I said, would you make out with a stranger in a closet? And I love how you said it in the simplest terms. Like, it's just a guy. He's 25 and this is just happening. Because I was just like, oh my God, like, no. But, like, no judgment, but like, I just don't see myself doing that.
Right. I mean, have I ever made out with a stranger in a closet?
Yeah.
No. I think there is, so actually there's a famous screenwriter, script writer, sort of consultant, named Michael Haig. And he once, I was like at a, seminar or whatever, listening to him talk about it. And he was like, what is love? And, of course we're a room of romance authors. We have a lot of opinions, but his opinion was, it's that you see past the facade that someone presents to the heart of them, and you actually see it early. You almost see it right away, even if the facade is different and you're like, and so I think the idea that they would have this makeout session in a closet is like they were not going to have that with anyone. So like they recognize something in the other.
I love that. I love that. See, this is why you're the author, and this is why I'm the reader.
Also obsessed with Tessa Bailey books. I have definitely read every single one. I love
I
her.
love it. I'll continue. I'll continue for sure.
Do the Schitt's Creek book next for sure.
Yeah, also big Schitt's Creek fan as a
Yes.
Canadian, and a big Dan Levy fan from his early days on MTV Canada. I'll definitely, if it has anything related to Schitt's Creek, I'll indulge.
It's fun also because like a lot of romance books, and like that I love too, they do feature sort of like the bookish girl, the shy girl,
Yeah,
and that's
yeah.
very relatable. Like we all get
Yeah.
that. But
Mm-hmm.
this is a nice departure where you're like, well, what would it look like to be that girl,
Yeah, totally. I really like that. I just covered Book Lovers last week on the pod,
Mhm.
and I also really like that it wasn't yeah, the shy girl, the bookish girl or whatever. It was like a very, I think, relatable character of like a girl in corporate America. So, yeah, I'm enjoying the breadth. Okay. Okay, this is my biggest question about the book, and I know it's because we wouldn't have a book if he was smart about things, but like, why didn't Ben contact Peter or the administration or whatever when Honey and him truly got together? Why wouldn't he be like, okay, like cool it on the like Peter, like here's an update. No further action needed.
I think the timeline on it was tricky. He was, I guess, sort of like flying after her a little bit quickly.
True. True, true, true.
And I also don't know if he ever sort of planned on telling the administration anything. You know what I mean? Like it took him by surprise as well that Peter had forwarded that. Like he was just going to be like, I am just quitting for no reason. I'm quitting because I'm going to go over here. But also can't use his words, like it just,
But also in the simplest way, he can't communicate really well. Like, that's so funny. Okay, our gripes and grumbles. These are nitpicky problems we have with the book. I hated the Lolita reference. Understood why it was there and like the purpose I think it was trying to serve. I don't think she would have written this. I think she would change that if she had wrote this nowadays. But yeah, I'm like, oh guys, I'm so tired of using Lolita as like the standard of like a age gap romance or like anything. Like it's really bad.
right. And also like because she presents in this very confident, mature way that is also so far from like the stereotype of Lolita, even if we were going to use it.
Absolutely.
No, I think it's a problematic book. It's a problematic reference, but like it's also like kind of doing it on purpose. And I kind of agree with you that I don't think it would actually get published that way now, but I also think like we were supposed to feel uncomfortable about it, I think.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's so funny. There's the one moment in his classroom where he's like, Lolita, like to the people he's lecturing to. And then everyone's like, what was that? Did you just say Lolita? He's like, we need to do an extra credit assignment. Like,
oh my God.
He's like, oh, gotta assign them more work. We talked about the Viv storyline, justice for Viv. Okay, what happened to the mom storyline? Okay, so there was the poetry night. He has to leave really quickly, and it's because his mom's in town, and he's staying with her, and like they kind of have like maybe like a little bit of a tense relationship. But I was like, we didn't get any closure on.
We didn't get any closure on
that.
Yeah, I wonder if like part of that was just to kind of show maybe why he can't communicate. Like this is where he comes from. This sort of like he wasn't British, right? But he has British vibes.
The academia, it's like if you're in academia and you're an English prof, like I'm gonna assume you have a British accent.
Yeah, so it's just like, yeah, we never learned how to talk about our feelings.
Yeah. Fucking, I got my therapy appointment at 3 today, like to discuss that very matter. So that's fair. I just had a question for you because I feel like this would normally be on my gripes and grumbles with like a rogue choice of a character's name. I actually kind of like the name Honey. What do you think of that name?
I liked it. I can get on board with a unique name. I tend to not do that in my own book. See also the professor, heroine's name, Anne, although to be fair, that was because of the Shakespearean thing. But no, I liked it. I enjoy it.
Me too. I think it suits her. I think it suits where she grew up. And I like the kind of flowery names that are like Honey, Summer, Violet.
Yeah. Like, I mean, people, like, first of all, are named for those things. But I also think there's a little bit of like, I mean, the tiniest bit, like part of the fantasy, like, don't we all want an interesting name? Like, don't we want a cool name? Like,
absolutely. And it kind of shows, I think, also that she's like a little bit fish out of water in the New York scene. Because I do feel like it's maybe like more of a people would name their kids there that like, grew up on a farm or whatever. And have a connection to nature or whatever. And it just seems a little bit more out of place in New York. Okay, finally, our sequel scoop. This is the tea on any upcoming sequels, seasons, and the general reception of the book. The book is a trilogy. The first book is Chase Me, and it covers Roxy and Louis/Lewis. And then the third one is Make Me, and it covers Russell and Abby. Which we get because Roxy and Louis are first, we get some of their relationship happily ever after in this book, and then we get some hints of Russell and Abby potentially getting together in the third one. So that's another one of my favorite things about the romance genre is just like the continuous storyline through multiple books is unlike any other genre.
Yeah, you get to kind of get the update, like, because don't you want to see how they're doing? Like, please show me how they're doing. Totally. Sometimes I just like envision if I were like a gazillionaire, just going up to like some of my favorite authors, especially when a favorite author stops writing or like never writes in that series again. And that's like one of my favorites ever. And I'm like, what if I just offered them like $10,000 to write me a single scene? You know what I mean? Just, like...
No, Why do I feel like that all the time? Like I'm the one begging on their like Instagram or be like, come back, like revisit.
And I'm just like, think about when we learned about like the patrons of the arts, like in the Renaissance, like the Medicis would just be like, come paint my wall. You know what I
Yes.
mean? And this is how you're going to support yourself, is by doing art that
Yes.
I want.
Yes, that could be us if we were the billionaires. Yeah, that we're writing about and reading about. Oh, that's so funny. Yeah, do you think Tessa will write like a, epilogue or anything like that in these previous series now that she's had, cuz the covers, I'll say, the covers got a refresh from when they were published in 2015. They got the like they had the handsome sexy man on the front, and then they got the cartoon, not cartoon, but like
Yeah.
drawn,
Illustrated. Yeah.
Illustrated.
Because, right, exactly. So when she had like the last breakout, like, because the thing is, the publishers have the rights to these books, and oftentimes they just sort of like languish, and then the author breaks out, and suddenly it's like, oh, fresh cover, put it in the bookstore, everyone wants it, which is honestly great though, for the author and for readers.
Totally. Yeah. Because when you sent me this book, you're like, oh, we should read this book. When I first looked at the cover, I was like, oh, this must be a new book because the cover looks like a 2020s cover. But yeah, I wonder if she would ever put a little sweet treat on her website or something as people rediscover some of these older books.
And I will say one more thing. She does have a book called Too Hard to Forget, it's not a professor student. It's actually a coach cheerleader.
Oh,
and it happens
interesting.
later. It happened, like, it's a second chance romance also. So like they have it and then they kind of split and then they come back together. So I don't know if I necessarily expect her to write something about these characters specifically, but do I expect her to maybe like do another iteration, like a new sort of take? Yeah, I think she could do that.
Yeah, interesting. Cool. We'll keep our eyes opened, obviously. Skye, this was so much fun. I feel like we covered so much ground. I feel like a lot of the topics we talked about, I'm like, I could talk to you for like an hour about just this one little thing.
I really could. I love talking about books and I love talking about them with you, and I had a really great time.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Can you tell the listeners where they can find you and anything else you want to plug?
So if you are interested in a professor romance that has a bigger age gap and a very academia, dark academia vibes, then you can check out The Professor, which is out now. And it's available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple Books, anywhere you read books.
I love it. I cannot wait to like do a little I didn't want to read it before I talked to you because I was like, it would just be in my head and then I would just want to talk about the book and we're talking about Need Me and stuff like that, but I cannot wait to dive into it. It's going to be really fun.
Yeah, I hope everyone loves it, and I hope everyone loves the whole Shakespeare deep dive.
Oh, I was literally just talking about how my favorite movies are Shakespeare adaptations, like She's the Man and 10 Things I Hate About You and stuff like that. So I'm ready for this one.
Yeah, no, I love it. I know. And this is not a retelling, but after doing the deep dive, I was like, oh God, should I do a retelling of, like 10 Things I Hate About You? Ugh, it's so much. Yeah.
Please.
Right. There hasn't been one recently, I feel like.
No.
It was kind of old, but yeah. No.
Yeah, it was a big 2000s.
Yeah.
Like subgenre of teen movies that I really appreciated. But anything that's like inspired by classic literature, I've really liked. Like I like some of the new Pride and Prejudice, Jane Austen type.
Oh, I do have, if anyone is a Jane Eyre girl, which was my favorite classic in high school, I did Private Property, which is billionaire on a windy cliffside with the nanny.
Love.
And that one is an actual retelling. So anyway.
Love. Okay, I love that. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate you. Thank you.
And that's the story of Need Me. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you to Skye Warren for joining me on today's show. If you haven't done so already, you can subscribe and leave a rating and review of the pod on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You can suggest a book or leave a voicemail of a question for a future episode via the links in the episode show notes. Our next episode is Priest. Until then, happy reading. For Ready to Be Romanced, I'm Tori. Goodbye.